Darren, and thank you for having me on again. You've been very good to Dog Advocacy Ireland, giving us some airtime and covering some of these issues that badly need to be addressed. So thank you.
Okay, John, our last interview on Near FM was only about 3 weeks ago, and in that interview we spoke about a meeting of Oireachtas members on animal welfare that was held a week or two before then. We're going to talk today about the lack of enforcement of animal welfare legislation in Ireland. I understand that the issue of enforcement of animal welfare legislation comes down to An Garda Síochána and the local authorities. John, this might be a big question, but can you give me some kind of idea of how big of an issue the issue of lack of enforcement of animal welfare legislation is in Ireland?
Well, Darren, it is a big question, and it's the reason why I formed Dog Advocacy Ireland, dog welfare, dog stroke animal welfare, but particularly dog welfare in this country. I mean, puppy farming is rife in this, and that means that unscrupulous dog breeders are earning up to 200 million. Again, I'll repeat this, I've repeated it before. 200 million per annum from this criminal activity, and it is criminal activity, where breeding bitches are being held captive in these hellhole puppy farms, and are being mistreated and abused purely to satisfy a greed, right? I call it a breed for greed culture. These breeding bitches and puppies are used as ATM machines. These poor dogs and puppies don't receive any petting, any love or affection or care, right? That's the reality. That's how it is on the ground. And that is horrific abuse and mistreatment of these dogs. And it must be addressed. Now, who has the responsibility for addressing it? Well, look, you mentioned the Gardaí here, but the Gardaí are not, in fairness to them, are not the ultimate enforcers of this legislation. They may be called upon, and they have been called upon in matters of seizure of dogs from time to time, and they've assisted animal welfare organisations and shelters in doing so. So it's not really down to the Gardaí to enforce current legislation. So the people who are responsible, currently the system is broken. Why is it broken, and why am I saying that? Well, if it was working, Ireland would not be puppy farm capital of Europe. With this level of criminality going on and that amount of money being earned from this activity, right? So the system is broken. There's widespread acknowledgement that that is the case, that dogs and animals, and particularly dogs, are being abused and mistreated and neglected, and it's not being addressed. And it's simply not acceptable, and it's intolerable, so it must be addressed. So, look, Dog Advocacy Ireland is currently seeking a meeting with the Minister for Agriculture and the officials in that department. I mean, ministers come and go, but usually the senior officials in government departments remain. So these are the people who hold responsibility for the Department of Agriculture in particular holds responsibility for the Animal Health and Welfare Acts. And like, obviously dogs are animals, right? And they come under that legislation. There is dog welfare protection legislation in existence. But there's little point in having legislation if there's no enforcement. I call it lip service legislation because that's all it is. They pay lip service to it. It's on the statute book, but it's not being implemented and it's not being enforced. So then there's little point, and it does nothing to address the criminality that's happening in Ireland that we actually find ourselves shamefully. Ireland is puppy farm capital of Europe. Not something we ought to be proud of. And I quoted Mahatma Gandhi before, Darren, on our interviews, and I'll do so again. Mahatma Gandhi, one of his quotes is, "The greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated. Mahatma Gandhi. Now, from what I've just described to you, and I've just given you an overview of this, Ireland is failing miserably. And dogs, thousands of dogs, as you and I speak right now, Darren, thousands of dogs are suffering in these hellhole torture chambers, because that's what they are. I'm not being dramatic with the language. That is what they are. Torture chambers where dogs never see the light of day. They're being bred to death. These breeding bitches are kept in constant pregnancy to satisfy this greed in selling puppies. And those puppies are not just being sold in Ireland, they're being sold abroad. So with that in mind, I have taken it a step further now in approaching the negligence from another angle, and I will continue to pursue it from this welfare angle, and seeking a meeting with the Department of Agriculture, the Minister for Agriculture, and his officials, along with others, by the way, in the like My Lovely Horse Rescue, who do tremendous work, and they're working on some of this as well with some senior Gardaí. I'm aware of that, so I can't speak on My Lovely Horse's behalf, but I know that they're doing tremendous work. So these issues must be addressed, and the other angle is going down the route of the criminality aspect of it, and engaging CAB. And by the way, CAB have shown an interest. They won't be giving me any feedback because that's their normal policy, but they are interested. And same with Revenue. Revenue won't be giving me any feedback. They do their job. That's their job, and they will carry out audits on some of these puppy farmers, because you get the way this operates, Darren, as you can well appreciate and you can well imagine, these puppies are advertised on websites and wherever else, but mainly on particular websites, and I'm not going to give them any credence by even mentioning them. But these cute little puppies are sitting in a couch in what appears to be a normal family home, and they even have these puppies in ribbons and bows and all the rest of it, to give the impression that these poor puppies who are being taken from their mothers at 8 to 10 weeks old and sold off, right? Those poor puppies are, they don't receive any affection. They're not being treated properly. But these potential buyers, and maybe unsuspecting buyers, are seeing this lovely image of a puppy sitting on a couch, which appears to be a normal kind of family home, and they're seeking a home for this poor puppy. And people are using that, and they go and buy these puppies, but they're not necessarily aware of the source of these puppies, or what the background is, and what the suffering is involved in that puppy's mother, the breeding bitches, and what's happening behind the scenes. So people need to be made more and more aware of this, and that's what Dog Advocacy Ireland is about, Darren, without any shadow of a doubt, is to address the source of the problems. There are 237 rescue shelters around this country doing tremendous work, where they're rescuing and rehoming dogs and horses, animals that are being abused, and I'm talking about dogs here again. These shelters are overflowing with abandoned or unwanted dogs. The same applies to dog pounds all over the country. Dog pounds are full to the brim, full to capacity with unwanted or abandoned dogs. So, there is a crisis, and I'm not the only one who's saying there's a crisis. Other animal welfare organisations are singing from the same hymn sheet. There is a crisis. So, it's immoral and unethical that we should be continuing to breed dogs while there's such a huge crisis. There are dogs, those poor dogs, in dog pounds and in shelters all over the place, all over the country, desperately needing homes. Why, in God's name, are we continuing to allow dogs to be bred by these unscrupulous breeders?
So what you're saying, John, well, one thing you're saying is that instead of putting the blame of the animal welfare, puppy farms and the animal welfare crisis, instead of putting on the lack of enforcement, um, instead of putting the blame on the Gardaí and the local authorities, we have to kind of go to the source of the issue. That's the Department of Agriculture, and am I right in saying we have to get the Department of Agriculture to issue stronger kind of enforcement? Would that be it?
Well, stronger. There is none at the moment, Darren, I'm afraid. So they need to get their act together. There's little, as I said already, and I don't want to just repeat it, but there's little point in having legislation uh, to protect dog welfare if it's not being implemented and enforced. So it is down to them. But you mentioned the local authorities here. This is where it's deliberately, responsibility is strewn across three government departments: the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Rural and Community Development, who had responsibility for the Control of Dogs Act, but I now see that that's being transferred to the Department of Agriculture. Now, being transferred and actually doing anything about it are two different things. And then the other government department is local government, because every local authority has responsibility for issuing these dog breeding establishment licenses. And in those cases, every local authority issues their dog breeding establishment licenses in their jurisdiction. But I can guarantee you that, again, under the current failing system, there is no governance in place of these dog breeding establishments, and there are no inspections taking place. Okay, and there's been a recent admission of that by a local authority in Kildare, that there is a void in terms of any data being kept, or any information being kept or updated on their particular dog breeding establishments, and that applies not just to Kildare but all over the country.
I know you were saying, John, around the time of the last general election, that you think, I believe you said, there should be some kind of an animal welfare authority. Do you still believe that, John?
Absolutely, Darren, because uh, again, the government departments who hold responsibility, and it's deliberately strewn across three government departments, which means like everybody's looking after it and nobody's looking after it. And if you try to raise an issue or raise a complaint with one of these government departments, you'll be told very quickly, as has happened numerous times, to myself included, that, oh, that's not our responsibility, that's the Department of Rural and Community Development, or that's the Department of Local Government, that's the Department of, right? So it's avoiding responsibility and accountability. So we do need to get away from that, because they've proven to have failed dismally, and they're failing dogs dismally, which has resulted in the unacceptable and appalling suffering of thousands of dogs, and this criminality that is allowed to thrive because of that failure and that negligence of enforcement. So yes, I'm calling for an independent animal welfare authority with sole responsibility, accountability, and transparency.
Okay, John, in terms of the Gardaí, this week, as you know, we have a new Garda Commissioner, and you proposed that Gardaí, as well as getting the proper direction from the department or an animal welfare authority, you propose that they should be trained in animal welfare in Templemore, don't you, John?
Yes, it's there's look, as been a new guard, Justin Kelly, a new commissioner appointment just this week. Maybe it's an opportunity for a fresh start. I noticed that one senior Garda gave an interview and gave a statement to Kildare FM incident of dog abuse, but it was in the context of he clearly said that the Gardaí are not sufficiently resourced. They don't have adequate training, so there is an issue of funding, and I actually agree with that because they're not being properly resourced, they're not being properly funded, and they're not being trained properly. So with all of that in mind, I would call the government back as far as 2020, Darren, promised and pledged to increase the Garda force up to 18,000. The numbers, they've never reached that numbers. They've never achieved that. In fact, the numbers are much less now than they were in 2020 because Gardaí are retiring. And a kind of a new phenomenon within the Gardaí is that Gardaí are actually quitting the force. They're opting to go for other employment. So they're quitting the Gardaí. And morale is at an all-time low. So, look, I would support that statement from the senior Garda official. And they do need funding. And they need to be resourced. And they do need adequate training. And again, with that in mind, Dog Advocacy Ireland is proposing that an animal welfare legislation module, a sort of basic module on animal welfare legislation, be introduced in Templemore Training College so that all future Gardaí will be familiar with the legislation and be aware of their responsibilities under that legislation, that that animal welfare is something that must be taken seriously and the law must be enforced. So with that in mind, a fresh start, a new broom, we can make this happen.